Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of SPED Talks with me, your host Donna Steele. This week we're going to continue with a part two to where we left off last week. So we're still on the topic of special education and areas of eligibility. We're going to pick up with visual impairment. But before I do that, let me just say a big thank you for your love and your support. The feedback has been great.
So that brings us to visual impairment. And simply what this means when a student has a visual impairment, it means a reduction in vision, and it includes blindness. That even with corrective lens, it adversely affects a student's education performance. It includes both partial sight and, as I said before, blindness. Some of the characteristics of students who has a visual impairment may exhibit includes clumsiness. So you might find that student might be a little bit more clumsier than the average student, tripping over, falling over things at different times throughout the day. Spatial positioning may be off. So you might instruct a child to take a chair maybe from the back of the room and put it next to a chair at the front of the room on one particular side, and you might find that he or she has not followed that direction to the T, and the chair might not necessarily be adjacent, it might be behind. Whatever the case may be, the spatial positioning may be off. Short attention span, so a student who has a short attention span and is visually impaired, I think you can see the connection with that, especially as teachers when you're presenting information in a visual manner and that student has a deficit in that area. Why should I even be paying attention? It doesn't appeal to me because I can't see it. So naturally, you can understand why such a student might have a short attention span. They might be sensitive to bright light. They might have poor eye and hand coordination, meaning when they write, it might be illegible. Poor academic performance. The impact of VI in the classroom, a student with this may read at a slower rate. They might have a lot of spelling errors. They might have difficulty copying because naturally, if you can't even see the board, how are you going to copy what is on the board? They might have challenges trying to figure out what is written on the board or on a sheet of paper that you want them to copy from. A student who has this issue, auditory information is going to be very valuable for him or her. Simply because if you have challenges with your vision, naturally, you're going to have to try to compensate in other ways. And one such way may be that student may be more receptive to auditory information. And as teachers, as educators, we probably want to be mindful of that so that we can provide them with what they need in order to reach their full potential. So auditory information might be the preferred learning style, and we know there are others. But if you have this knowledge, you probably want to go ahead and make sure that you have access to the information that you're presenting in an auditory fashion. Hearing impairment. This means a reduction in hearing quality, whether permanent or fluctuating, and it adversely affects, my slide is going ahead of me, and it adversely affects a student's educational performance. That is not included under the definition of deafness in this section. Because when we talk about hearing impairment, we're talking about the degree to which a person can hear. So it might be mild to moderate, while when we talk about deafness, we're talking about a little bit more profound, severe to profound, where a student or the person in question may have lost hearing completely. So that's really the difference. And the characteristics may look like this: articulation difficulties, because naturally if you can't hear yourself or you can't hear what is being said to you, you may have problem articulating what you want to say in response to what someone might have said to you. They might have language delays, easily frustrated, as one can imagine. If you can't hear and somebody is trying to have dialogue with you, and the reception at some point is distorted. So I would be frustrated if that communication has some distortion going on. Difficulty with oral expression, not being able to really orally express yourself, difficulty with social emotional skills, and often follow others but rarely leads. Again, that also ties into your social emotional skills and your self-esteem. So you might want to follow others because you might be unsure of what you might have heard or not heard, and be a little bit reluctant in leading. Notwithstanding that, I want to go back to articulation as well as oral expression. All of that has connection to your speech. So your hearing and your speech kind of go hand in hand. So if you can't hear, your speech in some way will be challenged, and you will have a deficit there as well. In most cases, the impact in the classroom, you may wear hearing aids, you may use FM systems, which you can turn up the volume and turn it down. You may read lips or use ASL, or in the Jamaican situation, you may use JSL. I apologize for not including that next to ASL. May need a quiet environment to be successful. You may use as many visuals as possible. So in the case of, this is the reverse, as in the case of a student who is visually impaired, where they are to compensate for their loss of vision, they might rely on auditory information. In this case, to compensate for hearing loss or being hard of hearing, a student of, in this case, may you need to rely on more visual information. So a classroom that has a student with such an impairment, you want to make sure that it's visually appealing. You want to make sure that student has access to visual aids, things that are going to bring out what you're trying to teach, the content that you're trying to teach. Because again, the aim is for the student to reach his or her full potential. Be mindful of your rate of speech and enunciation. Again, a student who has challenges hearing, you might want to make sure your rate of speech is not as fast, not too fast. You want to make sure when you enunciate, they can hear everything that you're trying to say. So you're going to be mindful of that in such a classroom. That brings us to intellectual disability. And this, for many reasons, when back in the day when we thought about students who had disabilities, we would always think it had to be some intellectual challenges. Growing up, we would see students who had Down syndrome, and Down syndrome does fall under the intellectual disability category, but we would always see them and we would always put a label on them. Not, like in our society, in the Jamaican society, let me clarify. When we thought about a disability, we always thought about that kind of disability, students having those kind of challenges. And when we think about disability, we always think that a student has to be intellectually challenged. And that is usually not, as we're seeing right now, we have several categories. So that is not always the case. And in our society, unfortunately, we refer to these people as fool, which in Jamaican terms mean foolish. And I'm hoping ultimately, well, we have gotten a far way where we're getting away from that. We're becoming a little bit more tolerant, but I've yet to really see where, as a society, we think of these students and people as, that they're not much different from us, and the disability should not be what separates us. But that is for another time. We will talk about that in another episode. All right, defined. Intellectual disability, or ID, can be defined as having a significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning. And what that simply means, it simply means this student has cognitive level is low, cognitive ability is low, as measured by IQ score. So the IQ score that is obtained for a student who is intellectually disabled they would score below average, what is considered significantly, let me put that word in, significantly below average in an IQ test, with deficits in adaptive behavior, and it would manifest itself during the developmental period, meaning during your young. Students usually find this out, or parents rather, usually find this out during a student's developmental period pretty early on. Once the child is still developing, usually infant stage, by the time you're ready for school, you would have picked up on some of these, and probably an IQ test would be warranted, and we would be able to ascertain that this student has intellectual challenges. So again, this is where their IQ test and IQ score would be very low, significantly lower than the average, and they would have deficits in adaptive behavior, meaning they would not know how to function in just the general space of society. It adversely affects a student's educational performance. And the characteristics, they would struggle with overall academics, attention, memory, generalization. You'd have to be very specific with these individuals, trouble interacting socially. In the classroom, it may look like a student not being on grade level. So a student who has intellectual challenge, the teacher would not prepare grade level material. The teacher would modify and accommodate as much as possible to present the information, because we want success in the classroom. So that would be something that an educator would need to do. They might not understand social norms. So again, you would want to teach that. You would want to teach those social, emotional skills. We would want to teach social skills. They may struggle with problem solving across all areas, academic as well as functional living skills. You want to teach these functional skills that they will need to be able to assimilate as best as possible in society. You want to teach those life skills, because as much as you and I can do it without thought, these students will need a curriculum that assists them to reach their full potential as much as possible. And that brings us to multiple disabilities. Multiple disabilities, as the name suggests, is having simultaneous impairment. So pretty much more than one thing happening at the same time, such as an example I have here, such as an intellectual disability or orthopedic impairment. So this is where a student may have an intellectual disability, what we looked at a while ago, and orthopedic, talking about probably be one of those wheelchair-bound students. So it's happening at the same time. Orthopedic, as the name suggests, bone. So they might have an impairment with their bone or joint. So a physical disability, in other words, coming together, the combination of which causes severe educational needs. They cannot be accommodated in special education programs only for one of the impairments. So they might have to be accommodated in a variety of different programs, not just special education program. They might need some rehabilitation program in addition to special education programs. So we're not just focusing on, in such a case, their needs as it is educationally, but you're also focusing on the needs maybe for their physical or mental health. And again, it may vary. So it may look different. The multiple disability category may look different. It might be a combination of autism with other health impairments. And we will touch on other health impairments in the next episode. But yeah, so it's a combination of more than one, as the name suggests. It's important to note that based on IDEA, multiple disabilities does not include deaf blindness. For IDE purposes, they don't require deaf blindness as a multiple disability. Let's see. The characteristics may include, and again, this may vary depending on what is the array of multiple disability that any one student may have. Again, that varies, but these are just some general characteristics that you may or may not see, but mostly these are the common ones. Hampered speech and communication skills, challenges with mobility. They may need assistance with everyday tasks. Students usually has medical needs. So the two very last one, those probably you'd see those across the board with students who have challenges with a multiple disability. They may definitely need assistance with everyday tasks, because now we're talking about disabilities that not only affect them educationally, but may affect them physically or mentally, or in some cases socially. Student usually has medical needs. Usually 9 out of 10 times, usually a student with multiple disability, there is that medical component where those needs also have to be met. And with that, we look at the impact. The impact of this in the classroom may need medical needs. So a student may need to go to the nurse for medication. A student may have somebody who comes in, maybe physical therapy. Cognitive level may vary. So the impact may, depending again on the combination of disabilities, their cognitive level may vary, or maybe on the higher part of the spectrum, they may not even have cognitive needs. Maybe it's normal or above normal in some cases. Multiple services, so they may require multiple services. And what this look like, they may require speech, they may require OT, they may require speech, OT, physical therapy. They may require ABA services. They may require multiple services throughout the day. And I've had cases where students receive all that I have named just now, and it's where the team come together and comes up with one plan to figure out, when am I going to get this student for this? When am I going to get that student for that? So it takes a unified approach to ensure that the students' needs are met and their potential, for learning is positive, because we want them to realize their full potential. The impact may include alternate communication methods. So for a student who has challenges with articulation, a student might require a device to express him or herself, to type, to communicate with teachers, to communicate with whomever. Alternate curriculum materials. So in a case like this, we might need to adjust, modify, accommodate. So the curriculum materials may not be what the general students are using or the average students are using. They might need to tailor it somewhat to the student's need, because again, the aim is for the student to realize his or her potential. That's what we want. And with that, I'm going to end here and pick up next week, where we will cover the final 4 disabilities. So shoot me your questions, concerns. Thank you.
So there you have it, another episode of SPED Talks with me, Donna Steele. This week we looked at 4 other eligibility categories. And next week we will conclude with the remaining 4 in a part 3. So if you have any questions, concerns, comments, perspectives, feel free to shoot me a message or a DM, and I'll be happy to respond. Until next week, this is Donna Steele signing out. Thank you.